Hello everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the 2018 MacBook Pro and see if this particular MacBook is still worth buying in 2024. Now, the thing I will definitely tell you is that without a doubt, this particular MacBook may seem like on the surface that it might be worth buying, but is it really? We'll talk about that throughout this whole entire video. The first thing is, if you do want to buy some MacBooks that I would clearly recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the 2018 MacBook Pros, you have to remember that these particular MacBooks came out in two different sizes. So they came out in that 13-inch and that 15-inch model. Nowadays, we have a 14-inch and a 16-inch model. But this was when these MacBooks were a little bit slimmer and they were just a little bit smaller in general. You still have the M1 and M2 MacBook Pro, not the non-Pro models that Apple's still selling, that are kind of reminiscent on this body, but otherwise you're still maintaining this type of body for the most part, and it's just an older type of styling when it comes down to it. At the very top, you were getting that Apple logo and that standard type of build, which I actually liked. I thought it looked really good, and no Apple glowing logo or anything like that, but I still think it looks fairly good for the most part. There's not that much to complain about here. It looks pretty good when it comes down to it. On top of that, from the sides, you are getting either dual USB Type-C ports or 4 USB Type-C ports with Thunderbolt, depending on which model that you actually buy. Now, again, it really depends on whether you get the 13-inch model or the 15-inch model. Personally, for me, the size of the 15-inch might be a little bit too big. I think the 14-inch size is perfect for me, but that 13-inch size for a lot of people, if you actually maximize portability, you can still maintain a really good type of device. But keep in mind with the 2018 ones, you might be only getting 2 USB Type-C ports depending on which model that you get. Now, there are no SD card, no HDMI ports or anything like that on these types of MacBooks, which really might not be a problem for a lot of people. I personally did use my M1 MacBook Pro for a few years without, a SD card or HDMI port, and I use those things all the time. So I had to plug in a dongle. It really wasn't even that big of a deal, and my monitor, I was able to just have a USB Type-C dongle coming from it. But for you personally, if you do use the SD card slot a lot, you may just want to go and consider buying one of the M1 Pro MacBooks, considering those things do have those things built in. So that might be one thing, but I think the port selection on these MacBooks is perfectly fine as long as you can swing for a MacBook that is giving you 2 USB Type-C ports on both sides. That might be the better option. But even then, if you have the one that gives you 1 or 2 USB ports on the one side, I think that might be okay for a lot of people as well. But personally for me, still gets a thumbs up. I still think it looks very, very good, and there's still a lot of ports that you can basically choose from. And it's still a fairly thin, portable MacBook that you can kind of bring around with you wherever you go. On the bottom, standard type of build, screws and everything. You can take apart if you want to. I wouldn't recommend it. And then you get to opening this thing. Now, here's where we start getting into some problems. Now, number one, this keyboard on this MacBook was prone of failure. There were so many issues that people were running into with these MacBooks, and I can tell you, luckily for me, none of my Intel MacBooks have ran into this issue, but I know a ton of people who are constantly running into these problems, where their devices were just running into problems where they would just the keyboards would just fail. A lot of the times the keys would end up typing random keys, and then the spacebar wouldn't work, or it would type in more letters or more spaces than it needed to be. This was a very, very big issue. And in my opinion, this is probably the main reason why I wouldn't recommend buying a 2016 to 2020 Intel MacBook. If you're buying the M models, that's a little bit different. But if you're buying those Intel MacBooks, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go and purchase those types of devices because those are the types of problems that you're running into. And I personally wouldn't recommend buying those devices either because of some other issues, which we'll talk about in a second. But for this one, not only were these keyboards failing, Apple had to go through and have a service repair program for these MacBooks. So that was another thing. But another problem that you're kind of getting inside of this particular MacBook as well is that you might be seeing, for the most part, that this particular MacBook, the service repair program is kind of coming to the end. So now you're running into this problem where you can't even go ahead and actually use this MacBook from a from a service perspective. You can't buy one of these older MacBooks in a couple years and then have Apple fix it. That's just not going to happen. At least for now, in the last couple of years, Apple fixed the problem. But then the problem could happen again, and you might be running into some other problems too. It is just basically never ending when you're purchasing and buying these types of MacBooks. And that in and of itself, I will tell you, is probably the biggest problem you would run into with this type of device. And that's the problem I had when I was personally going up and buying this MacBook as well. So although none of my MacBooks I ever bought had this issue, it was a very popular issue. Tons and tons of people ran into this problem, and it's probably the biggest detrimenting thing going on for this particular MacBook as of this moment. So take it as you will, but that in and of itself was probably one of the most annoying things going on for this particular Mac when it came down to it. So from that perspective, I mean, I could talk about this all day. You were either getting the touch bar on this MacBook, which is still nice. I don't mind the touch bar, but that kind of covers it up there. Like I could just hate on this MacBook from that perspective all day long. From the display front, still like a decent display. You know, these Retina displays still look very, very good. The only thing going on for these types of displays though, is that they don't have ProMotion, which is fine, but they're also missing out on the notch. Now, I will tell you, I don't know why, I actually do like having the notch on my MacBook. It gives you so much more display on the top sides, and you can't even really, like, it really isn't that big of a deal for the notch, like, being there, in my personal opinion. However, with these types of displays, though, with these older ones, you're still getting, like, a uniform type of display. There's not really, like, an insane amount of bezel. Like, clearly it's not the best looking thing in the world, but it's really, like, not that bad either, and I still think it looks, like, perfectly fine for the most part. Like, I've definitely seen, like, worse displays, and this is a very good display, especially considering it came out in 2018, and it was stemmed from the 2016 design. It still looks very beautiful, and I, again, don't have that much to complain about here from a design perspective. So that right there definitely gets a thumbs up for me for sure. In terms of the performance side, this is also another problem. So Intel MacBooks, some people will, have a perfectly good time with these types of Intel Macs, and there are advantages of having Intel Macs. Like you can install Windows Boot Camp, you can monitor, dock it up to multiple displays versus the standard M1 models at the time. Now you can with all, the newer models, but older ones you couldn't. At least with these ones, the performance, the problem I always had with the performance of these MacBooks was that you were essentially running into the fans kicking up all the time. And this was by far the most annoying thing going on for me. Like when I had this MacBook, I was able to go ahead and like just my fans would kick on much more frequently than I wanted them to kick on. And for maybe a lot of people, that's not the biggest deal in the world. But when you're recording audio like I am, like right now, I would have to constantly move my MacBooks around when I had my Intel MacBook. And that was a very annoying thing. I hated running into that problem because I would want my particular device to not have to run into that issue where I'm like not running into the fans kicking on all the time. It was a very, very annoying thing. I'm very happy that I didn't have to go ahead and deal with that for now, but at that time I did. And even from a performance perspective, that's another problem too. Like when you're going through and if you're getting a device that's going to be giving you, I guess, a better performing device, then clearly you can always go for it and, you can get a better performing one. But for the most part, you're definitely getting a significantly better performing MacBook on the current M models, even the M1 model, than from this one. So keep that in mind. It's not like the biggest deal in the world, but if you're a power user, you may want to consider going up to one of the more expensive M models, in which in some ways it's expensive, but it's probably not. It's probably roughly around the same price depending on which configuration you get. So it's just another small thing to kind of keep in mind there too. But overall, what I'll definitely tell you is I like the 2018 MacBooks. I thought they were good. It's just, there were just so many issues plaguing these types of devices, and I just never really liked them from that perspective. I think there are significantly better options out there, and I do think you're overall in a much better situation if you do go ahead and buy one of these types of MacBooks that will give you a better experience. And I do think the M models are probably the ones I'd recommend purchasing. I don't think I'd recommend buying these Intel MacBooks anymore, and that's just kind of what's going on. I think you are much, much, much better off purchasing MacBooks that are still supported, that are, basically still giving you software updates, and are the M models. And I would just recommend going up to Apple Silicon rather than these Intel-based chipsets. So from that perspective, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.